I'm Mark Elliott, sitting in for Kasem. Well, we got 4 big debuts this week, and entering at number 34, here's this week's highest debut. It's the first hit for a singer of Nigerian and Brazilian descent who was born in England. He calls himself Seal, and he calls this song Crazy. That's Seal Henry Samuel, better known as Seal.
Casey's Top 40.
Well, now we're up to the song Crazy. It's by a newcomer named Seal who once did such crazy things on his motorcycle, he's now restricted by contract from riding one. Over the years, we've heard about a lot of strange things that have been insisted on in talent contracts. Some of the most famous came along in the early days of the movies. Silent film star Buster Keaton was known back then as the Great Stone Face because he always wore the same blank expression. His film company wanted to make sure that he stuck to that image, so they put a clause in his contract that made Buster promise never to smile in public. Then there was French singer and actor Maurice Chevalier, a man known for his distinctive French accent. His movie contract specified that he could never take a role in which he didn't use that accent. For years, he was America's favorite Frenchman, and his studio meant to keep him that way. By comparison, the restriction on the singer and songwriter named Seal is a simple one. Before he was signed to his record contract, he had developed quite a reputation as a wild and reckless motorcycle rider. He was always going off the main roads riding dirt trails, and he'd never wear a helmet. He had even picked up a number of scars from biking accidents, including a big one that runs from his right knee clear down to his ankle. So when Seal was negotiating his record contract and the label contemplated sinking a lot of money into promoting his album, they wanted to make sure that he stayed in one piece. They insisted on a section in Seal's contract that says that if he ever rides a motorcycle, he's fired. Seal isn't crazy about that restriction, but since the only thing he loves better than his bike is his music, he's happy to go along with it. This week, Seal's got even more to be happy about because his first top 10 is still moving up the chart, rising a notch to number 9. Here's the singer you won't see on a motorcycle these days, Seal with Crazy.
Casey's Top 40.
And falling 3 notches to number 17 is a singer of Nigerian descent born and raised in London. Despite his mother abandoning him twice and his father dying when he was still a teenager, he was able to reach inside, pull himself together, and establish himself as one of Britain's brightest new stars. Here's Seal with Prayer for the Dying.
Casey's Top 40.
And that means we're up to the number 1 song in the USA on Casey's Top 40, brought to you by Johnson's Clean and Clear. This week's number 1 is by a singer who went completely bonkers the first time he hit number 1 in England. It happened back in 1990 before this singer of Nigerian descent had gone solo. At the time, he was a singer for a musician named Ademski, a man who put out dance records. Their most recent one together was Killer, a song that had reached number 4 on the English charts and was still climbing. Well, that very same week, the singer was having lunch with Ademski at a family-style restaurant near Cambridgeshire, England. They had taken along a small transistor radio so they could listen to the countdown to the British Top 40. As the countdown progressed, they found they weren't at number 5. They weren't at number 4. They weren't at number 3. And when they found out they weren't at number 2, there was only one place they could be. The singer says, quote, "I let out this huge roar. Honestly, families around us were going for their children, protecting them from this 6'4" tall man gone wild in Cambridgeshire," unquote. And the singer says he was so excited that he had to go to the men's room to throw cold water on his face just to cool down. These days, the excitement continues because recording as a solo artist, that singer now has his first number 1 in the USA. The song that for the 3rd week in a row is the biggest hit in the land. The number 1 song in the USA on Casey's Top 40 is Kiss from a Rose by Seal.
Casey's Top 40.
Hi, this is Casey Kasem. Well, the British singer named Seal has sealed up the number 1 spot on our survey for the 4th week in a row. He's done it with Kiss from a Rose, a song from the soundtrack to the movie Batman Forever. Now Seal is trying to hold off the challengers and get a 5th week at number 1. We'll find out if he does it as we count down all the biggest hits in the USA on Casey's Top 40.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. This week's number one is by a British singer who learned the hard way that it doesn't pay to ignore good advice, even if that advice comes from a storefront palm reader. It all started back in 1992 when the singer was on his way to a club in the Soho district of London. As he was walking, he passed a storefront lit up with a bright neon sign advertising a palm reader. Since he'd always been interested in things like that, he thought he'd give it a try. So he went in, and after the palm reader had thoughtfully studied his hand, she looked him straight in the eye and told him to be especially careful, because in the months ahead, he was going to face a series of personal trials. At the time, the singer didn't give much weight to those words, but then strange things began to happen to him. After he went to California to begin recording a new album, he came down with pneumonia. When he finally recovered, the palm reader's words of warning came back to haunt him again. One day, he was driving his Range Rover down a twisty canyon road when he lost control, hit two telephone poles, and rolled the car over. After he recovered from all that, he got sick again, this time with what's called post-viral fatigue. When conventional medicine failed to cure him, he thought back to his encounter with the palm reader and decided that if the occult could predict his problems, maybe it could cure them. So he began visiting a faith healer who he claims helped a lot. And he says he'll never discount the words of a spiritualist again. These days, all those personal trials are a distant memory, because the British singer is riding high. 4 weeks ago, his latest hit reached the top of our survey. And now, for the 5th week in a row, it's once again the biggest hit in the land.
Casey's Top 40.
Well, now we're up to Kiss from a Rose. It's by a British singer of Nigerian descent who loves to snowboard, a hot star who was first attracted to the sport because he thought the clothing looked cool. Snowboarding is kind of a combination of skiing and surfing. Instead of going down a snow-covered mountainside on a pair of skis, you use a single board, not unlike a surfboard. One of the biggest snowboard enthusiasts in music is Seal. He first came in touch with snowboarding when a shop opened in his London neighborhood that sold snowboarding equipment. The sport intrigued Seal, but what he loved the most was snowboarding clothing. So he bought himself an outfit and decided to learn the sport. Seal fell in love with it, and now he does everything he can to snowboard whenever he can. He even arranges his tours so that he can snowboard all year round. These days, Seal isn't sliding down a mountain. He's standing at the peak because a song of his that recently spent 8 weeks at number one is in the running for the number one song of the year.
Casey's Top 40.
From Hollywood, this is Casey Kasem. Well, now we're up to Don't Cry. It's by a Grammy-winning singer-songwriter who didn't learn to play an instrument until he was in his mid-20s. Before that, he'd compose his music in his head. He's the British musician named Seal, and his early years in life were very difficult. Seal came from a dysfunctional family, and there were many times he ran away. Seal's life was so turbulent that he had little time to pursue his musical dreams. After he finally ran away from his home for the last time, Seal wound up living in abandoned buildings in London as a squatter. And to occupy his mind in those difficult conditions, he made up songs in his head, intricate songs that he stored away in his memory. Eventually, he found an old tape recorder someone had discarded. He got the thing to work. And using only his voice, he recorded some of the songs he'd composed in his head, including a symphony. It wasn't until his mid-20s that Seal learned to strum the guitar and write down his songs that have helped make him a star and win him Grammys both for his performing and his writing. Here's Seal's current hit, survey song number 13 on Casey's Top 40, Don't Cry.
Casey's biggest hits.
5 years ago this week, one of the biggest hits in the USA was by a singer who says he made himself sane by going on a 3-month pilgrimage through India and learning how little a person really needs to survive. It was back in the late 80s. The man who calls himself Seal went on a tour of Japan with a band called Push. And when the tour was over, he decided to travel around. He wound up spending a lot of time in India. What he found there were people with almost no possessions at all. But because their spiritual life was strong, because they chanted and meditated often, they were content and happy. If they had clothing to wear and food to eat, they had enough. Seal says that trip affected the way he's lived his life ever since. He says it made him sane. 5 years ago this week, Seal had one of the biggest hits in the USA. Here's Crazy.
Casey's Top 40.
And tumbling 8 notches to 34 on Casey's Top 40 is Seal, a British star who loves to give gifts. And thanks to the success of hits like Crazy and Kiss from a Rose, Seal can afford to give some very lavish gifts. But he hasn't forgotten what's really important in life. Quote, I could buy my mom a new car, but if I went around and gave her a big hug, it would mean much more. Unquote. Here's Seal with Fly Like an Eagle.
America's Top Hits.
This week back in 1995, one of the top hits in the USA was Kiss from a Rose. It's by a singer whose whole life was changed when he won a school talent show singing the song I Can See Clearly Now. It was back in 1974. This young man was just 11 years old at the time, and life hadn't been good to him. His mother had abandoned him when he was born. His father would punish him severely for even the smallest offense. He was withdrawn and introspective. But he did like music, and he was inspired by a teacher to enter the school talent show to help him deal with his shyness. He sang a version of the Johnny Nash song, I Can See Clearly Now, and he won the contest. That gave him a deeply needed shot of confidence, and it began a process that led to one of the top hits in the USA this week back in 1995. Here's Seal with Kiss from a Rose.